for the similarly named battle during the Seven-Year War. See Battle of Imjin River. The Battle of the Imjin River, also known as the Battles of Seoul Marie or Battle of Gloucester Hill in South Korea, or as Battle of Zhoumali in China, took place 22 to 25 April 1951 during the Korean War. Troops from the Chinese People's Volunteer Army attacked United Nations positions on the lower Imjin River in an attempt to achieve a breakthrough and recapture the South Korean capital Seoul. The attack was part of the Chinese Fifth Phase campaign, also known as the Chinese Spring Offensive, the aim of which was to regain the initiative on the battlefield after a successful UN counter-offensive in March 1951 had allowed UN forces to establish themselves beyond the 38th parallel at Line, Kansas. The section of the UN line where the battle took place was defended primarily by British forces of the 29th Infantry Brigade, consisting of 3 British and 1 Belgian infantry battalions supported by tanks and artillery. Despite facing a greatly superior enemy numerically, the brigade held its general positions for 3 days. When the units of the 29th Infantry Brigade were ultimately forced to fall back, their actions in the Battle of the Imjin River, together with those of other UN forces, for example in the Battle of Kapyong, had blunted the impetus of the Chinese offensive and allowed UN forces to retreat to prepared defensive positions north of Seoul, where the Chinese were halted. Though minor in scale, the battle's ferocity caught the imagination of the world, especially the fate of the 1st Battalion, the Gloucestershire Regiment, which was outnumbered and eventually surrounded by Chinese forces on Hill 235, a feature that became known as Gloucester Hill. The stand of the Gloucestershire Battalion, together with other actions of the 29th Brigade in the Battle of the Imjin River, has become an important part of British military history and tradition. Background: the battle took place during the Chinese Spring Offensive, aimed at recapturing Seoul. The commander-in-chief of the Chinese and North Korean Communist forces in the field, General Peng Dehuai, issued an operational directive that summarizes the initial objectives of the offensive. First of all, we will mass our forces to wipe out the 6th Division of the Puppet Army, the British 27th Brigade, the American 3rd Division, the Turkish Brigade, the British 29th Brigade and the 1st Division of the Puppet Army. In order to achieve the objective, Peng planned to converge on Seoul with the 3 IXM-19 army groups, which had a combined strength of around 270,000 men. The 19 Army Group was positioned on the left flank of the UN line. Its 63rd and 64th Armies were to cross the Imjin on a 12-mile front and then to attack southeast towards Seoul. 3 divisions of the 63rd Army, the 187th, 188th and 189th Divisions, attacked the British 29th Infantry Brigade's positions on the Imjin River from 22 to 25 April 1951. 25 miles further to the east, other Chinese forces assaulted UN forces which included the 27th British Commonwealth Brigade. That battle became known as the Battle of Kapyong. At the time of the Chinese attack, the 29th Infantry Brigade, commanded by Brigadier Tom Brodie, consisted of the 1st Battalion, the Gloucestershire Regiment, under Lieutenant Colonel James P. Carney, the 1st Battalion, the Royal Northumberland Fusiliers, under Lieutenant Colonel Kingsley Foster, the 1st Battalion, the Royal Ulster Rifles, under the temporary command of Major Gerald Ricord, and the Belgian Battalion, under Lieutenant Colonel Albert Crehay, to which Luxembourg's contribution to the UN forces was attached. The British soldiers were a mixture of regular soldiers, reservists and conscripted national servicemen. Their supporting units included 45 Field Regiment Royal Artillery, tanks from the 8th King's Royal Irish Hussars and the 170th Independent Mortar Battery, a Royal Artillery, which were attached to the brigade. The 29th Brigade was under the command of the U.S. First Corps and was one of several UN formations responsible for holding the western flank on the lower Imjin River. the others being the 1st Republic of Korea Division and the U.S. 3rd Infantry Division. The right flank of the ROK 12th Regiment, the nearest position of the ROK 1st Division, was a mile to the southwest of the Gloucestershire Regiment, while the U.S. 3rd Infantry Division was east of the 29th Brigade. The deployment of UN forces meant that the 29th Brigade, with its 4 battalions, had to cover a front of 12 miles. Gaps between units had to be accepted because there was no possibility of forming a continuous line with the forces available. Brigadier Brodie determined to deploy his men in separate unit positions, centered upon key hill features, on the left flank. The Gloucesters were guarding a ford over the Imjin, known as Gloucester Crossing. The RNF were deployed near the centre, around 2 miles northeast of the Gloucesters. The Belgians, occupying a feature called Hill 194 on the right, were the only element of the 29th Brigade north of the river. Their connection with the rest of the brigade depended on 2 pontoon bridges about half a mile apart. These bridges connected the Belgians with Route 11, the 29th Brigade's main line of supply and communication, and thus made vehicular movement between the north and south banks of the river possible. The Royal Ulster Rifles served as the brigade's reserve and were deployed along Route 11. The scattered deployment was one aspect which complicated the defence of the 29th Brigade's position. Another was the lack of heavy artillery. Fire support was provided by 45 Field Regiment, RA, equipped with 25-pounders, under the command of Lieutenant Colonel Mount Young, and by 4.2-inch mortars of 170 Heavy Mortar Battery, RA. No heavier artillery support was available. Further support was provided by Centurion tanks of C Squadron, 8th Hussars, under the command of Major Henry Hooton by 55 Squadron, Royal Engineers. However, defensive preparations were not carried out very extensively because the British expected to hold the position for only a short time. Neither minefields, deeply dug shelters nor extensive wire obstacles had been constructed. The British position on the Imjin River was deemed safe but vulnerable in case of an attack. Battle. The first night the battle opened on the night of the 22nd of April 1951. A Chinese patrol on the north bank of the river moved around the Belgians on Hill 194 and continued to advance east towards the 2 bridges on which the Belgians depended. Elements of the 29th Brigade's Reserve, the 1st RUR, were deployed forward at about 10 p.m. to secure the crossing but were soon engaged by Chinese forces trying to cross the river. The Royal Ulster Rifles were unable to secure the bridges. This development meant that the Belgian battalion on the north bank of the river was in danger of being isolated from the rest of the 29th Brigade. Chinese forces following the initial patrol either attacked the Belgian positions on Hill 194 or continued their advance towards the bridges. Those who were able to cross the Imjin attacked the Fusiliers' Right Rear Company, Z Company, on Hill 257, a position close to the river and almost directly south of the crossings. Further downstream, Chinese forces managed to ford the Imjin and attacked the Fusiliers' Left Forward Company, X Company, on Hill 152. The retreat of X Company from Hill 152 had serious consequences for Y Company, which occupied the right forward position of what can be described as a squarish Fusilier position marked out by 4 widely spaced company perimeters at the corners. Although Y Company was not attacked directly, Chinese forces threatened its flanks by forcing Z and X companies from their positions. After unsuccessful British attempts to regain those lost positions on Hill 257 and 194, Y Company's position was abandoned, the retreat being covered by C Squadron, 8th Hussars. On the left of the brigade line, a forward-deployed patrol of 16 men repelled 4 attempts by a battalion of the 559th Regiment, 187th Division to cross the river, but was eventually forced to fall back when their ammunition reserves ran low after inflicting 70 casualties without suffering any loss. During the rest of the night, the Gloucester's right and left forward companies, R&D companies, engaged Chinese units trying to cross the Imjin. By morning, R&D companies had suffered severe casualties. Only one officer in A Company remained in action. Casualties included A Company's commander, Major Patangia, who was killed during the night. The Gloucester's withdrawal to Hill 235 on the 23rd of April. Attempts to regain control of areas lost during the night by the Fusiliers and American forces from the 3rd Infantry Division's reserve failed. A U.S. attack by the 1st Battalion, 7th Infantry, on Communist forces near Hill 257 was ordered to support the Belgian withdrawal from the north bank of the Imjin River. Despite losing 7 vehicles, the Belgian battalion successfully executed its withdrawal, which was coordinated with the beginning of the American attack on Hill 257. The Belgians escaped to the east and took up new positions south of the Gloucesters and the Fusiliers before moving to the vicinity of the 29th Brigade's command post. At around 8:30 p.m. on the 23rd of April, the forward companies of the Gloucesters, R&D companies, were withdrawn from their positions after suffering heavy casualties. C Company, under Major Paul Mitchell, retreated as well, but it was impossible for B Company, under Major Dennis Harding, to disengage and join the battalion's remaining elements on and near Hill 235, a position between the Imjin and the Solmatian stream that became known as Gloucester Hill. The men of B Company were able to drive off 7 Chinese assaults on their position before they, too, managed to withdraw to Hill 235 the next morning. Only 17 men of B Company remained in action after reaching the remainder of the battalion. During the night, as the Gloucester's B Company faced numerous attacks, the Chinese 188th Division crossed the Imjin and attacked the Fusiliers and the Royal Ulster Rifles on the right of the brigade's line. The 187th Division also engaged the brigade's battalions on the right, while the 189th Division kept up the pressure on the left. Most dangerous for the unity of the 29th Brigade was the Chinese deep penetration of the line between the Gloucestershire Regiment and the Northumberland Fusiliers, cutting off the Gloucesters. To counter the Chinese attack and protect the Gloucesters from being completely surrounded, the Philippine 10th Battalion Combat Team was temporarily attached to the 29th Brigade. A combined force of M24 tanks of the 10th BCT and Centurions of the 8th Hussars supported by infantry reached a point 2,000 yards from Hill 235 on the 24th of April. However, the column failed to make contact as the lead tank was hit by Chinese fire and knocked out, blocking the route and making any further advance against heavy resistance impossible. At this point, according to an official American narrative of operations, the brigade commander considered it unwise to continue the effort to relieve the Gloucester Battalion and withdrew the relief force. Retreat of the 29th Brigade continued. Chinese pressure on the UN forces along the Imjin prevented a planned U.S. attack by the Puerto Ricans of the 1st and 3rd Battalions, 65th Infantry, to relieve the Gloucesters. When 2 further attempts by a tank troop to link up with the Gloucesters failed, Brigadier Brodie left the decision to Lieutenant Colonel Carney whether to attempt to break out or surrender. No further attempts to relieve the Gloucesters were undertaken because, at 8 a.m. on the 25th of April, 1st Corps issued the order to execute Plan Golden A, which called for a withdrawal of all forces to a new defensive position further south. In accordance with orders issued by 1st Corps, the 1st Battalion, the Royal Northumberland Fusiliers, the 1st Battalion, the Royal Ulster Rifles, and the Belgian Battalion tried to reach the safety of the next UN position, supported by C Squadron, 8th Hussars, and 55 Squadron, Royal Engineers. The Belgians occupied blocking positions west and southwest of the 29th Brigade's command post in order to allow the other units of the brigade to fall back through the battalion's positions. The withdrawal under intense enemy pressure was made even more difficult by the fact that Chinese forces dominated parts of the high ground along their line of retreat and were thus able not only to observe any movements by the 29th Brigade, but also to inflict heavy casualties on the retreating units. Among those killed was the CO of the Fusiliers, Lieutenant Colonel Foster, who died when his jeep was hit by Chinese mortar fire. In the words of Major Henry Hoot of the 8th Hussars, the retreat was one long bloody ambush. When B Company of the Ulsters, which had acted as rear guard during the retreat, reached the safety of the next UN line, all elements of the 29th Brigade except for the Gloucesters had completed the withdrawal. The Gloucesters on Hill 235. The Gloucesters' situation on Hill 235 made it impossible for them to join the rest of the 29th Brigade after it had received the order to retreat. Even before the failed attempts to relieve the battalion on the 24th of April, B and C companies had already suffered such heavy casualties that they were merged to form one company. Attempts to supply the battalion by airdrop were unsuccessful. Despite their difficult situation, the Gloucesters held their positions on Hill 235 throughout the 24th of April and the night of 24-25 April. In the morning of the 25th of April, 45 Field Regiment could no longer provide artillery support, since Brigadier Brodie had left the final decision to Lieutenant Colonel Carney. The Gloucester's CEO gave the order to his company commanders to make for the British lines as best as they could. On the morning of the 25th of April, only the remains of D Company under the command of Major Mike Harvey escaped successfully from Gloucester Hill and reached the safety of friendly lines. After several days, the rest of the battalion was taken prisoner, including Lieutenant Colonel Carney.